Welcome to the webinar on immunizations and state requirements. What we're going to be going over today is how to enter immunizations, how to produce an immunization certificate, and to check whether or not the student is compliant with the state rules, and if need be, how we can modify those state rules. To start with, we're going to go in under Health, More Health Editing Jobs, and we're going to go down to the Edit Health Condition Codes. This is where we store the communicable diseases. So if they actually had chickenpox or German measles or something like that, these are the codes that you would use. And at the bottom of the list is where the immunizations themselves are. Now we currently are coming up to 226 as the last, or at least in this system, is the last immunization that I have listed as ones I can pick. I happen to know that there are more that I have added to the system. So what we can do is I'm going to close out of here, and we're going to go in under Health Operations, and I want to refresh my health condition codes. And what this allows you to do is I can say, well, just give me my immunizations and bring me up to date for all the new immunization codes that I've put out there. And this is because there are new code combinations that we can work with, and it just lets me make sure that I have all the ones that I want to work with. So I can go back under my Health, More Editing Jobs, and edit the health condition codes. And now when I go to the bottom, what I'm going to see is I actually have some that are letters rather than numbers. And these are more for the ones that are, I don't know what type it is, because my immunization card might just indicate it's a DTP, DTAP, and I have dates, but I don't know which kind it was, or the same with polio. It might not be showing me whether it's a IPV or an OPV. So I have ways to bring this in so I can make a determination and have that in my rules. I've also added a few more. There was one of the states that needed to know whether it was an ACT HIB or a PEDVAX HIB, because the rules are a little different for those. And there was also, somebody had a tetramune, which is the DTP, not the DTAP, and HIB combination. And those are just ones that I've added into the rules. So you can have as many different immunization codes as you want. There are a set that come standard with the system, and we have immunization rules that use those. The recommendation is that you have the same codes for all of your schools, so that as a student moves from one school to another, those codes are going to roll with them, and they mean the same thing whether I'm in an elementary to a middle to a high, whatever the case may be. Immunizations don't use subcategories. I mean, you can throw one on if you want, but we don't normally need them. There is a sort order, and what the sort order does is it allows you to group the immunizations together based on their type. So if I scroll back up toward the top of the list, I'm going to be able to see where I have DTP, DT, TD, the different types of diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, and I can have them all grouped. I can even have them all on the same order, so that when I list them and look at the student, this is the order they're going to be in. So it doesn't matter what code I'm using, I'm going to group all of those together. So it makes that easier to work with. You can copy this whole table. The HNC are my health conditions. So that could be a visual impairment, it could be that they're diabetic and so on, and my communicable diseases. I can have all of those, and I can copy them, entering what school I want to work with, and then I can import them to another school to make sure that I have them all the same. This is especially useful when I'm starting up or if I'm adding from one school to another. If I want to add a new immunization, I just go up to the yellow plus. I indicate that it's an immunization that I want to add, and I give it a new code. So if I want to add another one, 332 might be the next one I haven't used. If I enter a code that is already used, when I click OK, it's going to come up and tell me it's already used and to select another code. So it won't let you put the same code in twice. and use it for two different things. So it's just a matter of enter it in, put in a code. Letters, numbers, any combination is your choice. And then I can put in whatever the new immunization is. So if I need to, there's some new combination that for some reason I'm going to do Hib and my OPV, my oral polio. Now anything before the dash is going to show when I go to my initial entry of immunizations in a grid type format. So it just gives me a way where I can see what that is. And then I can indicate what it is. It could be a combined. What I've done here with the square brackets is I've given the brand name, just so I know, because sometimes what comes in is the brand name of, okay, they got a Boostrix. Now, unless you know, you wouldn't necessarily know that that's a Tdap, but it gives you the indication of why you might need to know. And then I can come in and add the sort order. Now, if I see these other Hibs are 36s or my polio is another number, the Hibs are usually required, are only given to students who are 5 years and under. So for the most part, unless they're preschoolers, you're really not working with Hibs too much. So I might be doing it more because of the polio. And so I would want to do my sort order based on the polio, not on the Hib, because that's what I would be checking on mostly. And since my polio unknown here is a sort order of 11, I would make this one a sort order of 11. And I can add as many of these in as I need. I can also go into the printer button. I'm just going to save this first. And when I go to the print button, it allows me to print my health codes. And I can come in and say, oh, okay, I don't need my dentals, I don't need communicables, I just want, I don't need health conditions, I want communicables and immunizations. When I print, the communicables are going to be on their own page, because each of those types are going to be on their own page, and it lists them for me. And then when I go to the next page, I can see all of my immunizations. And it just gives me a list of what the code is, what the description is, and the sort order. So it just gives me a nice way to work with that. If I would like an electronic copy of that, I can change my output option and either go to a PDF or go to Excel. And it will bring up the HLC is because it's the health conditions, RPT because it's a report. I can put in front of that I'm doing my immunizations and communicables. And that way I just have a better idea of what it is this report has, and I can change the location. The default location is going to be in my work folder, but I can click the 3 dots or the ellipsis and move where that is. So if need be, I can change to another drive if I have other drives on it, or go to the network. So it does give me that capability that I can output that to Excel if I need to. And then when I print, it's going to come back and tell me that it output that, and I can then pick that file up later. Anytime I've output to something other than preview, I want to remember to come back in, because it will remember that I said go to a PDF or go to Excel the next time I go to print something, even if I don't mean to go to the printer or wherever when I do that. So are there any questions about adding in the base codes that I'm going to use for entering immunizations?
Just one question actually about subtracting. Like, is there any kind of mechanism that if you deleted one of the immunizations that you don't think you need, just to clean it up kind of, would it warn you if you were taking one out that was required for your state or city?
It would not tell you that you are deleting one that is required for the state or city. It would not allow you to delete it if you have actually used it. What would happen would be that when you print your immunization requirement report, it would show as unknown, as it's not on file anymore. And that's not a problem because none of your students have the code, so it's just going to skip over the code anyway. It's only in the printout that it might show that's like, well, this is an unknown type of immunization, and that's not a problem. So to enter the immunizations, you can go in a couple of different ways. One is to come in under Health, More Health Editing Jobs, and to do an initial entry of immunization. What this does is it gives you like a grid to put them in, and it's letting me know I have no stored settings for my immunizations for the setup, and that means it's going to load up my default settings. So it's going to give me the options of my DTAP, DTP, DT, and TD. All of these are versions of diphtheria and tetanus, the top two also having pertussis. And then it gives me my 2 polio choices, my combined measles, mumps, rubella, the individual single doses for those or a double, and then some of the other items. Now if I just go over to enter immunization dates, enter dates, it's going to give me a grid that I can see that I can just put my dates in. The top 6 immunizations overhang where I can pick the students based on their name. So these are the ones that can have more than 4 doses, which is usually why DTPs and polio are on the top of the list, because those are usually the ones where we have more than 4 shots. For the other ones, I can rearrange. If I'm not usually using the child dosage or the adult dosage of tetanus diphtheria, and if I'm pretty much not using the straight DTP, because they haven't really used that in a while, they've been using the more current DTAP, then I can go back into my setup of initial immunizations and change what's here. So if I would rather see after, maybe I leave these 2, if I want to see my Tdap, because a lot of states are requiring it 7th grade and older, or some of it at 6th grade, I can click where it says the DT child vaccine, and I can change this to one of the other ones like the tetanus. Now if you want to, you can put in the actual type of Tdap that you're having. And the reason that we might need to know the difference between the Boostrix and the Adacel is the Boostrix can be given as early as 7 years old, where the Adacel, they need to be 11 or older when they have it. If you don't know, then you just use the straight Tdap, and then you just put that in as you need. And if you opt that now, and I know I don't need 7 doses of Tdap, that's usually just a 1, so I can go ahead and change the number of doses. I can opt that I want to skip a line.
Well, can I interrupt you 1 second?
Sure.
When you change the doses, you know how they need certain doses at certain
Correct.
ages? And if you just change that, how does that reshuffle? For the age?
All I'm changing here is how many slots I have to enter doses with.
Oh, okay.
And since the Tdap is a one-time, the last I knew they weren't taking a second dose of it, I can leave just the 1 shot. That's all. It doesn't change what the rules are. It's only telling me how many places do I have to enter. Like MMR, it's giving 3, even though most of the time they only have 2. Unless the first one is before their first birthday, and then you ignore that one and go from there. All you're doing here is just saying how many places for dates do I have. If for the most part you're not doing OPV, because that hasn't been pretty much on the market since 2000, you can go ahead and uncheck it or change it to something else. And if I uncheck, all it does is it just gives me a hole, a blank area to put things in.
Would it let you take it out in that case, if we had an 8th grader who had that and we tried to take it out on here now?
All this is just how am I entering it. Right. It's not whether the student had it or not. Now I can leave it in and not worry about it. Now the single doses of MMR, usually unless the student's coming in from out of country, they have the combined dose.
Right.
I might want to add in, instead of the individual doses, I might want to select the MMRV, which is a combination of measles, mumps, rubella, and the varicella, and put that out here. Okay, and I might want to follow it with my varicella. So I have my MMR and then my varicella.
Okay.
So I can have all of those right there, and then I would modify it over here and saying, oh, I don't need that one. I might want this to be my, I think I already had Hep A. I did. So it lets me modify what I want to see. Okay, and I might want to be able to bring in meningitis, because more and more of the states are requiring a meningitis shot. Or I might want to put in, and that I think they're now doing, it's up to 3, I think. And I might also want to bring in my HPV, the human papilloma virus. And that again
Even
is...
though that wouldn't be required.
It's not required, but I can put it in anyway.
Okay.
And I might want to set it up that all the required ones are up at the top. So maybe I want to put my Hep B up front. I can only go up to 4. Do the blank and then change this. So here's my Hib, and then there's my HPV. And I used a space bar to drop the scroll box, and then I can just scroll down. And if I had printed the list, I would have seen what my codes are that I can work with. Or I might need to be able to put in, right under my regular Hep B, I might want to put in the dose, the 2-dose version that you do if the student starts it after age 13 or between 11 and 15. So you have the 3-dose version and the 2-dose version. So it gives me that capability to put them in. It won't let me save the settings if I have duplicated one of my shots. But what this does is when I come over here, it lets me see what else is out there, and I can put things in. So it just makes it easier for me to enter. You can have as many different setups as you want. So if you have a standard card that comes in for your state, you can set this up basically for that card to make it very easy for you to enter. The dates at the bottom is where I can use basically shortcuts. So if some of this was geared for, say, when the schools were giving their flu shots, and if they were having a flu clinic, then I could come in and say, okay, on October 31st of this year, I want, and it's going to be my control F1, when I come over here and start entering, I can go to the flu shot area and hit a control F1 on my keyboard, and it will fill that date in for me, which makes it very easy for me to fill dates in. If I'm entering them, say, for a set of twins, a lot of the shots are going to be on the same dates because the kids went in together. And I know I have my 2-month shots, my 4-month shots, and my 6-month shots. So I can set up my hot shot dates so I can just do a control function and it will fill in the dates for me, you know, when I do that combination. It's just a way to set it up so you don't have to be putting in all the dates all the time. That's all. At the bottom, you can indicate about documentation. Have you received it or not? If you did receive it, what version did you get? What was the source? Was it written, verbal, or both? The student might have had chickenpox that the parent could be telling you that is a verbal, where all the other ones are actual shots that are coming from the card. So that's where it might be both. You fill in your dates. You can go to the next, the purple arrow here with the next ID says it's going to save my current data and go to the next student in the list. This list is based on your current filter, so I'm in an alphabetic filter. I might want to be in a year of grad filter so that I'm doing, say, all my kindergarten, all my incoming, which predominantly are my kindergartners. I can put all those in, and then I just go straight through. It's an alphabetic. And I can just go student to student. If I don't want to do that, I can click in the list of students, type in who I'm looking for, and say, okay, I'm going to enter Mickey's information. Enter. It's going to bring Mickey's information up here, and I can just start entering dates. It will also give you the student's birth date. So with that, I know that their Hep B was probably given at birth. So I can go ahead and put that in. And I have the next one 2 months later, and then 2 months after that. And I might have my next dose after 4 years old. So it might have been that it was sometime in November, and it was in 1999. So I can, as easy as that, fill in the dates. So it's just a way to get your dates in. And if I said yes for the documentation and indicated that it was written, when I go to the next student, it's going to save that with the fact that I said yes, there was documentation. So it's a nice quick way. If I want to keep this setup that I put in, I can come back to setup and I can save the settings and indicate, either leave it as immunization setting 1, I can change the description, I can add more settings, however you want to set it up. And you just go ahead and hit select. Now if Mickey ended up with another Hep B and I don't have room for it here, I can also bring up the student's immunization editor, and I can have both of these up at the same time. Now this little immunization hypodermic needle just means I can have both of these here. I could also have gone under health, more health edits, and bring up edit the student's immunizations. So all of those give me possibilities that I can work with. Any code I don't have here, I can always add when I'm in the individual student's editor. I just won't see it in this grid unless I add it as one of my lines. And all I would need to go here is just go ahead and add another record, and I could come in and say, oh, they had a flu shot, maybe they had their flu shot last year. So it might have been that sometime in November last year they also had a flu shot. And if I don't know the code, I can go to the description and type in influenza. So this column lets me select based on the code. This column lets me select based on the description. Now as soon as I've put in the date and what immunization it is, it will automatically calculate how old the student was when they had their immunization. Because some of the immunizations, when you go in, they have restrictions as to be compliant, they have to have them at a certain interval or a certain age. And so by calculating this, it lets me see how old they were when they had the shot. So that makes it nice. Now with Amy being 17, depending on the state, she needs her Tdap. And I know she doesn't have one in here yet. So I can go ahead and add in a Tdap. I can either add it over here or add it over here. Either one will work. If I want to make a specific which Tdap it is, I might come in and say, okay, she had this 2 years ago, so no, we're going to give her Boostrix. So she had her Boostrix when she was 15. At that age, she could actually have had either one. So it lets me know what she has. This alert that's showing up is letting me know that Amy has a health condition that I have flagged for alerts. And when I click on that button, it's going to show me she has an allergy to bee stings and she's diabetic. So it just gives me a nice quick way to see what's going on. One of your alerts could also be whether or not the student has an exemption. Parents have a philosophical or religious reason for exemption. It gives you that capability. So this lets us put it in. Now we can put additional information on the immunizations, and that's if you wanted to have, say, if it was a flu shot, not a flu shot, but maybe varicella. I might have done something where I want to be able to come in, and under my additional information, I can put in whether they received their documentation or not. And I can say, if I say, yes, I've received the documentation, I can also say, apply this to all of my records. So all the records that are there will now say, yes, I received documentation. You can do letters for those that are missing documentation. You can also put in the source and again apply it to all. If I don't apply it to all, then I'm only doing it on the one shot that I'm on. Below that, you can indicate if the fact that they had an immunization was done through serology, and it wants to know the date of the serology and what the titers were. There is also a place for a diagnosis date and a scheduled date. The scheduled date would be if the student is not quite up to all their immunizations, like maybe they don't have their Tdap yet, but they're scheduled to take it next week. So you can come in and put in a scheduled date. You can also, back on the Immunizations tab at the bottom, this is because I said do the documentation for all, and I'm going to say yes to this and for the other. But there is a provisional admittance at the bottom where you can say yes, no, or clear it out. So if a student was, their shot, they need one more shot to be compliant for school entry, you can give them a provisional admittance. You can also indicate an exclusion date that if they have not gotten their shot by such and such a date, then this is the date that they're going to be asked to leave school because they are putting the other students at risk. So that's just your choice of whether you want to use those or not. The information on the right side of the additional information is if the school administered the vaccine and if you sent the immunization or vaccine information sheets, whether they were given and or returned. I would say that most of the schools are not going to use that right-hand side because the schools are no longer giving the shots anymore. On the Exemption tab, the Exemption tab is where you can specify for any one shot or more that there is a reason why they're not getting the shot. There could be a medical exemption where they could be allergic to something in the setup of the vaccine. There could be a religious or philosophical exemption. I have a question of if they entered an exclusion date, is there any type of alert that comes up, or is there a report that you can print out? There is a report that you can print out for the provisional admittance. I don't know if there is one off the top of my head for the exclusion, but both of those items are actually stored in the student's biographical record. So you would be able to print out who has a date from the biographic, because that's where it's actually stored. So if I say yes that there is an exemption, I also have to fill in a date and a source. And if it's a religious or philosophical exemption, I also have to fill out a reason. The source could be the parent, somebody else. It just depends on what you need. If you make the student exempt in one shot of a series, they will be exempt for all of the shots in the series. So it's not just the one, it's all of them. If I do put in say a medical exemption and I put in a date, and it might be the same date, it might be a different date, really doesn't matter. And I'm not going to apply it to all. The apply to all might be if maybe on a philosophical or religious basis is why they're not having any of the shots at all. But when I set this up and I go back to my immunizations, I'm going to see on the right-hand side under the exemption column that it says medical exemption. So I know at that point that they are compliant. So that's not going to be a problem. When I look at the View Students' Health History, that's going to give me the ability to see all of their health history, not just the alerts. But if the student had had chickenpox, I might have had a line in here saying that they had chickenpox. So it's just something that lets me know that that's out there. And that's usually the preferred way to enter the fact that they had the disease. If I go over to the compliance requirements, that's going to let me see what's out here of whether or not the student is compliant based on the different groups that I have set up. Now some of these, like the Hep B, there are two different rules that the student can pass one of them and be compliant for that immunization, for that disease. So they can either have 3 shots of the half a milliliter or the 2 shots of the full milliliter. So it lets me make a determination. And depending on the state depends on how complex some of these rules can be. You'll notice at the bottom it says the student is compliant as per requirements defined in my setting 1, the 2011-2012 Pennsylvania intervals. Now I'm working in 12-13 and I might need to bring those up to date to 12-13 instead. And I can do that by going to my state immunization requirements and either just reloading to get the up-to-date rules, and that'll bring them in, and I've actually got my 13-14 rules set up that I've been working on, and it will let me see what's going on. So now I have 2 lines. I've grouped my tetanus and diphtheria. I have separate ones for polio down through varicella. I have grouped my Hep B and my pertussis. And sometimes these are grouped because it might be that based on how many shots I'm having or how old the student is, the rules can be different. So on something like my pertussis, it's only needed for grades 7 to 9. I don't actually need to bring it in for anyone else. So I can test what it is. So this is the overall group or disease. The right-hand side are my subgroups. And what this does is it allows me to see for each of the different areas of why the student might not be compliant. So I can come in and see, okay, they need 4 or more doses. Dose 1 minimum age is 6 weeks. The dose 1 to dose 2 interval is 4 weeks, and so on. If I was looking at 3 doses, one of the things is the age. They have to be 7 or older. And so 1 dose has to be on or after their 7th birthday. So I can have different rules for what's going on. I can print the rules out. I can actually come in and modify the rules. If I modify...
Now those on the last screen you were on, we're in Massachusetts, so if we click on Massachusetts, it's going to automatically have the rules in there? Mm-hmm. The requirements?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And now if I've added things when I'm just documenting the immunizations, like if I added their HPV, it wouldn't affect this?
No.
Because it's not a requirement. Is that correct?
Correct. So if I load up Massachusetts, because I've been working on getting the immunizations ready for the 13-14 school year,
okay,
I might see a line that says Hib or Hep B or HPV, but when I look at how many doses are required, if I close out of here and come back over here, the required doses is going to be 0 because it's not required. You know, if I'm PK to 6, I don't need a Tdap, so the required is 0. And that's not a problem. It'll still show how many shots they had, but none are required. So if it's something that I was putting out there for you, then you're going to see that. Otherwise, they have it. We're just ignoring it. Now, I have a question about going over the immunizations if one was given too early. Depending on what it was, if it's the MMR that was given before their first birthday, the rules actually now take that into account. Where if the first shot was less than a year old, then I'm going to start counting at the second shot. If it's not MMR and there was a shot that was given too early, then it's more difficult to exempt, because if you exempt the one shot, right now it exempts the whole series. So even though they need 2 MMRs, it's going to say, oh, you exempted one, therefore they're good for the whole thing. I believe we have a enhancement request in that will allow us to exempt a specific shot, and I will put in that let's make a setup so that we can say ignore this shot. I want it in there because they had it, but I don't want to deal with it. So that gives me a way to work with that. When we're working with the rules and we look at the different things that are going in here, so if I look at measles and I look at how many doses they're supposed to have. So for K to 12, they need 2 doses. For pre-K, they need 1. I can come in and modify the rules, and it says, well, if the student had measles, if they had the disease greater than or equal to 1 day prior to today, then they're exempt. They've passed the rule. Otherwise, I'm going to test, is it one of these shots? So it's either the combined straight MMR, the MMR with the V, the varicella, an individual measles shot, or a combined measles rubella shot. So it can be any combination of that, and that if they're pre-K, either under PK or PS, if dose 1 was given when the student is less than 361 days, then the total number of shots they need is 2 or more. Otherwise, it is 1 or more. The 361, rather than 12 months, gives me my 4-day grace. So a lot of the schools, what a lot of the states do is they allow for a 4-day grace period. So if you have it just a little bit early, they're counting it. If it's 5 days early, then it doesn't count and they're not within the requirements. So that's why this is 361 days and not 365. Now, if they're not a preschool or a pre-K, then my other rules are saying, again, this is for K to 12. If it's less than 361 days, then they need 3 or more shots. Otherwise, they need 2 or more. So there are ways to come in. The parentheses allow me to clarify my ands and my ors because I'm mixing them. If I look at the next rule of whether or not they are 12 months. So I can come in again, do they have the disease? Or if it's one of these. What I'm doing after that, because of the first shot not counting, if it's less than that, I can say if dose 1 was given when the student was greater than 361 days old, they're cool. Or if it's less than 361, then dose 2 must be given greater than 361. So it gives me a way to be able to go in and test for that. And I do the same thing for intervals. There are ways when you come in that you can specify what the interval is. So I'm saying if it's between the date of dose 1 and dose 2 separated by a minimum. And these are in the setup requirements where I can test what is the vaccine, what grade level does the student has. That's how I got in the pre-K or the pre-S. How old the student is. There are some requirements like the Hep B 2-dose series. They have to be 11 years old or older. So I have to put the age of the student in there. I can do it on what date their birthday is. There are some states that there are certain rules if it was before or after January 1st, 1990, then it either applies or doesn't apply. Another age of student is polio. If they're 18 and older, they usually don't require a polio shot. I can do it based on the total number of doses. I can compare to when the last dose was given. So if the last dose was given prior so many days, weeks, months prior to today, I can test on that. That's where the Tdap comes in. If the student is basically 11 or older and it has been more than 5 years since the last tetanus, diphtheria tetanus shot, then I need to get an updated shot. Your comparison can be less than or equal to, greater than, or greater than or equal to. And I would say most often we're playing with greater than or equal to. But I have some where I'm playing both ways. You can also say what is the date of the last dose. It must be given when the student is so old. So that's where I put in where originally date dose 1, or I have one where the last dose must be given when the student is greater than or equal to 4 years old. But my 4 years old doesn't allow for a 4-day grace period. So I have all the calculations made, and I happen to know that 365 times 4 minus 4 days divide by 7 is exactly 208 weeks. So if they've had it when the student was greater than or equal to 208 weeks old, they're compliant for having had it after the 4th birthday. You can do it on a specific dose number of how old the student was. Again, greater or less than any combination. Days, weeks, months, years, doesn't matter. And I can also indicate the interval between dose 1 and another dose. Now this is just a little spinner where I can say up and down however many doses I want to work with. This is a drop down because the bottom item is last dose. When I am comparing, I want to say it's the Hep B, that there is a spacing between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, and also between 1 and 3. I have to have a minimum of 16 weeks between dose 1 and the dose 3 or the last dose. So it lets me do that comparison. And this is strictly if I'm doing it between doses, it's at least this far because it's just how many days do I have. The last item in here is the student had, and this is where I can pick my communicable disease. And again, how many days greater than or prior than today. So it lets me go over. And when I'm looking for the communicable, I can do it either by the code or the description. So I don't have to know the code, I just have to know what the description is. Some of your communicables that you put in there might include mononucleosis. You might want to put in whether they've had head lice, whatever combinations of immunizations or communicables that you want to put in there. So this is a way to get that in there. But you can add as many of these rules as you want. In Massachusetts, I have the Hep B as a group, my diphtheria tetanus as a group, and then my Tdap. I have actually 4 different rules based on what grade the student is in to be able to see whether they're compliant or not. So you can set up as many of those, and you can set up different settings where I can have up to 10 different settings that I want to check on. If there is a specific one, say if I was only wanting to check on Tdap, I could come in and set up a rule set just for Tdap. Or I might come in here and say I only want to do my Tdap. And I can either take these existing rules and strip everything else out, or I can get rid of my other rules, and that I deleted the whole thing, so I can add a group. Say I want to call it that it is my Tdap. Now if I need multiple sets of rules, then I need to put in open parentheses group, what it is, close parentheses, and then say, one shot or whatever it is that I want to put in here, and then put in a description of my subgroup. And I can come in and look at the vaccine and say, okay, if they've had 208, add it in, put in a parentheses to start it, put it in OR, so I can select multiple types of codes. So I can do OR, the last one, and then close parentheses, and put in, okay, I need greater than or equal to one shot. So this is a rule that lets me check, do I have one shot or not? And it can be any one of these. So it lets me put in as many rules as I want.
Now, if you had you had said, like on this, you could just do the Tdap, and I could have kept the groups that you already had for Tdap, the other things, and that would have covered what you just put in.
Correct.
Right?
So if I exit out and go back in and go back to my second rule, when it deletes, it should delete only the group that I specify, not the whole thing. So it'll delete all of these and this at the same time. That's what it was supposed to do. I'm not too sure why the display was a little different. So that's what I was expecting to be able to do, is just leave the others there. Get rid of everything but my Tdap, and maybe I want to put the meningitis in too, because that's a possibility. Now in Massachusetts, it only applies if it's residential. In Philadelphia, it doesn't matter, they have to have a shot. So it all depends on the state that you're in as to what is required or not required. So if I wanted it to be just the Tdap and not the meningitis, I can then come over here and change the rule set and say that it's Tdap. And if I exit, this becomes my current rule set. So I will be able, I want to save the changes. Now when I can see whether or not they are compliant based strictly on Tdap. And I can just sequentially go through the student, and it turns red if they're non-compliant. So they have to have, if they're in the right grade, they have to have at least one.
Now I would have to go through each student separately?
No, I'm just rolling through them individually. If I am using this rule set, I can come in under Health, do my reports, and do an immunizations, the student report of the immunization record listing. In here, I can come in and say, show me those students who are non-compliant, and give me a separate report that details why they're non-compliant. So if I skip out of here and only do, say, the A's, so I've cut down how many students I'm going to process. When I print, I'm going to be able to come in and see who's compliant or who's not. So it's letting me know everybody was compliant within that area. And it might have been because of the what grade they're in. Either they had the shot, or they were in a grade that didn't require it, or it has been less than 5 years since the last DTP.
So conversely, because I'm a paranoid person and it said there were no records, I would be concerned that I screwed up. So I could conversely hit the compliance.
And do them all.
And do them all. And
Now when I print, if I'm doing compliant or non-compliant, the first report is going to give me a record listing of all of their shots. And this record listing is in date order. And within the date, I'm not sure what order they're doing it after that. I think it's the sort order within the date. So I would see that for each of my students. And then when I close, if they were non-compliant, it would give me the reason why. I can also say, print those students that do not have any immunizations recorded. And now I'm going to get a list of pretty much everybody else because they don't have any. I can't compare to see if they're compliant if I don't have any record at all. But I can get a list of here are the kids that are non-compliant, that don't have any shots. You can also look for students who have exemptions. These are sort of I can do this or I can do this. I didn't mention when we were entering students' immunizations that you can do incomplete dates. If I know the student got a shot, but I'm not sure when, I know they got it July a couple of years ago, but I don't remember the date, I can actually put spaces in the day, and it will let me do that. It will assume it's the end of the month, I believe, rather than the beginning of the month. But it will let me do that, and I can do the same thing for the month. If I just know that, yeah, they had their shot in 2011, but I don't remember when, it's actually going to allow me to do that. And I can run a report of who has incomplete dates. Because if the student had chickenpox at home, they might not have reported it to the doctor. If it's the third kid in the family that's had chickenpox, the parents might know what it is by now. I know in my family, by the time we hit that, if I got chickenpox, I was 6 out of 7 kids. Mom had seen it before. She didn't necessarily have to go to the doctor. So it gives you those options. So it's, how do I work with that? If I want to do an exemption, somebody asks for a review, they can come in, do the exemption, put in medical, the date of that, and it's showing you the same format of the date, month, day, year, and the source. As I said, depending on the type of shot it is, if it was given too early, they can go from there. Now, the system will not like it if you try to set up a shot before the student was born. So if I somehow mistyped, it's going to tell me I can't put one in before the student was born. And what will happen if it does bring one in? I'll see a negative year. I'll see that they're less, they're 30 years old, a minus 30 years. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't quite work. So it does need to pay attention to how old the student is. I love the ones that are more than 9 months before they were born. And sometimes it was just, did a typo when I was putting it in, and I can go back out here and put the correct date in. Now, I don't have to put all 4 years in. I can put in just the decade if I want. Oh, that's going to be too young. No, it isn't. And I can do that, and it will accept it. And if I save the record, when it refreshes, it's going to put in, if I go to the next student and come back, that'll go back out to a 4-digit year. So I don't have to put the 4 digits in if I don't, but I would put in the leading zeros for the month and year, month and day rather. It doesn't hurt you any to put the 4-digit year, but you don't have to. And that also applies in my initial entry. If I was on a different student, I can go forward. I might want to bring up the health history, which is this little H with the snakes. And it might be that this student they actually had chickenpox. So I can go in, select which immunization, select the date that they had it. And again, this might be one where they had it when they were 6 or they had it when they were 3. So I can come in, put the spaces or zeros, and then put in the date, and it will show how old they were. You can also put in a note. They had a mild case, whatever you want to put in. If you do fill in a note, it'll go red. I can go ahead and save that, come back to their immunizations, and if I look at the history, the chickenpox was supposed to show up. I did save it. Thank you. So I can see that they had it. Now, even with nothing else for immunizations, if I was in the full set of immunization, if I went back to set 1 and I exited, I would see that the student is compliant for varicella They require 2, but they had it, therefore they're compliant. They're compliant for meningitis because in Massachusetts I don't need to actually have a shot unless it's residential. If the students are on campus and they're living there in a dorm, then they have to have their shot. But otherwise they don't. In other states, they're looking 7th grade and older. They want the kids to have 1 shot of meningitis. And they would prefer the MCV, the conjugate, rather than the polysaccharide. But the rules can be different depending on which kind they had. The rules can be different 6 different ways. So it lets you see that. Now, if I'm in the student's compliance and I go to the printer, excuse me, that's their profile, not their printer, I would be able to see what's going on. Let's come back over here. I should have my printer button. Oh, because I don't have any immunizations, that's why. The sister will have it because she has immunizations. So it lets me see what's going on. So it makes it nice to do those sort of things. If I go ahead and close out of both of these and my initial entry, I have other things that I can work with. Under health, more reports, we did the immunization record listing. I can also do an immunization certificate, and it's going to use either the one rule I have, or I can pick any rule if I have more than one rule set up. If I have immunizations that aren't on this set, I can select up to 10 more. So if I want to make sure that I put in my Boostrix, and I can come in and say, okay, there's only 2 of those, and I want to put in the Adicel and have spaces for that, I can do that. I can print a blank certificate. The state that it's going to show is based on the state in my license, and I can opt that I don't want to show that or don't even put that in at all, and I can get rid of it. I just swept across it and deleted it. So if I'm printing a blank one, I can use this as an example to give someone. They can select what grade they are. They can put the name and the birth date up here. This gives the extra on the Boostrix. I think I might have done the other one because it should be showing Adicel. So it lets me pull that in. It lets me see whether there's documentation and source. It says do not sign unless minimum requirements doses are complete. So it gives you that option to see. If I actually show, and then there is information here for signatures and exemptions. Now, a lot of the states have a specific exemption form that they would need to fill out. If I'm not doing the blanks, I can do the student that I'm on. I can opt to bring in contact information. I can say whether I want to print the exemptions or not. There was at one point where we would put the lead toxicity into the immunization detail of the lot number and so on if the school was giving the immunization. That was one place at one point that we were putting lead toxicity before it had its own area. If I go ahead and just print Amy, when I print this, I'm going to be able to see what she has. So there's the Boostrix. Here are her other shots. Now, if she happens to have more than 4 of the Hibs or 4 of the pneumococcals, I might have to display those a different way or move them up higher when I was setting things up in order to show that they had all those shots. So it just gives me a way to be able to print this out as needed. Now, Amy was exempt in her second shot, so it's showing that, and it's showing that it's a medical exemption. Doesn't show the date, just shows that they did have an exemption. Because most of the exempt, you only need to put 1 shot in. If you have a student or parents who are say religious or philosophical exemptions for all of the immunizations, what you would do is you would say put in 1 DTAP, 1 polio, 1 MMR, 1 varicella, 1 Hep B, whatever else is required for the state. And then when you're entering the immunizations, you would put the exemption in once and say apply it to all of them. And as long as they have at least one date for each immunization group, it will make them exempt for all of them. So it gives you that capability. When you are printing the student record listing, this is where you can come in and say only print those that have provisional admittance. And let's actually make somebody provisionally admitted. So if I go print the record listing and I say give me those that are provisionally admitted, when I print, they can be either one, thank you. I'm only going to see those that have them. I did too. Really and truly I did. You like that one any better? There we go. So there's Christine because she didn't have any shots. That's why I had to go with those with no. But there is the provisional admittance with the date. Okay? I can also see that date in the biographical record list by field. And this is the exclusion date. Or I can put in the provisional admittance and say give me the exclusion date also. And I can say, oh, only show me those where provisional admittance is yes. And then here's the student with their exclusion date. So I can get a list that way of those students. Okay. Other reports is I could do it just on the record of immunizations, which is how many shots have they had. So I can come in and say, okay, in between 1990 and the end of this year, helps if I do it the right order. Show me students who have here's my MMR, shows students with less than 2 MMRs. And I can say print my totals only. I can print the missing one, so if they don't have it, they're going to show 2. And I can start a new page for, say, each immunization. So if I do an immunization and say start a new page, I'm only doing the one, so it's not going to really matter. And I can go ahead and print. So here are the students with 0 or 1 occurrences because I said less than 2. So it would let me see who those were. Okay? So that sometimes is a nice quick way to find the information. You can come in, if I was doing more than one item here, I could be instead do, more than or equal to, set it up to 1, and add the condition. I could put ors between, depending on which one I'm looking for. So I could come in and say, okay, if I'm mostly doing DTAPs, add that in. I don't want the MR. I can come in and say, okay, do this one, add it in, depending on which one, if I want to do my IPV. So basically I'm just saying show me what's here if they have one or more of each. I could have done it as more than or equal to 0 instead. Then I can say go ahead and print. And this one I'm doing is each one would be on their own page versus order by student. So for each of the students, it's going to show me, what they're looking for. I'm doing missing ones because I specified include, print only missing. So there's my IPVs. So for each of those, it's going on its own page. And I can see how many are occurring. If I don't want separate pages, then I can say no. I can say count totals only. I can include if I'm not doing totals only, I can include the detail. I can do grand totals only. All of those nice things depending on what you need to see what's there. Okay?
Beth?
Yeah?
This is a little bit further back, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of what it was called. When you set up, like, your immunizations, what you were going to put, or you went in kind of, like, labeled it?
Setting up the codes themselves or to do the initial entry?
Do the initial entry.
Okay.
Oh, no, I guess it's not initial entry then. Yes. When you save the settings on, if you go back, if you save settings, over time I've done different ones. And I'd like to just get rid of I'd like to just keep the one that I have.
So if I had another one in here, so I have another immunization setting.
Right. Now, the ones
and
that I have...
So you have a whole list.
The ones that I've made I can delete, but I have some nurses that have come and gone, and I'd like to just clean it up and delete it, but it won't allow me because I didn't make it.
Okay.
How
Is
do
it locked?
I don't know.
Okay.
Off my head.
Usually administrator can delete anything. So if I want to get rid of the setting, I would highlight it, come over here, and say delete the record.
Right. But so if I go in, have the administrator go in.
Yep. And give administrator access. Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Now, if it's locked, it means only the creator can save on top of it. But usually it should let anybody delete it. But yes, you can do that. You can go in and get rid of them.
Okay.
And that does happen if you end up with a whole slew of these and it's like, I'm not using them anymore, go away.
I have updated and more updated, like...
Rather than just overwriting the one you had. Yeah.
Yeah, because I got confused as to how I was supposed to do that, and,
And it's also which ones are you doing. I might have one set that has basically the current shots. So I would have the DTAP, but I wouldn't have the Tdap, the DTP. I wouldn't have OPV, I would just have IPV.
Right.
That sort of thing. That, I might not have the extra Hep B because I predominantly don't have it. And that can really cut down my list if I don't care. I don't need to track rotavirus, pneumococcal, Hep A, flu, HPV, or Hib. I can just get those out of there. And then my list becomes, and I can say, well, I don't need that one. I might not want that one, and I don't need that one. And I can set them all up that they're all right up here, right up at the top. And that makes entering it a whole lot faster because I'm not wading through all the codes I don't have. Because I got to sit here and tab across before I get to the next one.
Yeah.
But that can make it a lot faster for getting the entry in. And you could change the order because they might have changed their immunization card and put them in a different order.
Oh, every doctor puts them in a different order, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Well, it depends on if they're doing the state form or not. Mom had a 5x7 card that had them all on it.
Yeah.
You know, one for each of us. So you can have as many different sets of these as you want. You know, if you're concentrating on certain things, then like I did with the Tdap, I just had the Tdap ones out there. And I might have needed to throw TD on here because depending on the age, they might have had a TD, an adult tetanus diphtheria, rather than the Tdap, or they have a pertussis constraint where they can't have the pertussis side and they can only have the adult.
But now by putting in here, that doesn't mean it's a requirement.
No, this is just entry.
Okay.
All this is
because I have
entry.
entered a lot of other things because, you know, eventually
it was there.
They're going to follow other things, so I already have them in there.
Well, things like the meningitis.
Not required.
It's not required right now in Massachusetts, but it could be in the future.
Exactly.
If it's younger grades when they get their meningitis shot, it might not be, you know, if they're a 5th or a 6th grader, they got their meningitis. If you go ahead and put it in when they become a 7th grader, now they see, yes, they had it, you're cool.
Exactly.
And some of these rules that we were setting up in the compliancy all have to do with, you know, if they're one of these grades, like the difference here and here is which shots they had. You know, that's the big difference. So it lets me see what's going on. And by splitting out the shots, if I go back here for Amy and I change her varicella, okay, and I come in here and say, okay, she didn't have it at this age. She had it, so if I had it in May rather than June, okay, she's 11 months and 6 days. She's now going to show she is no longer compliant, or she's not supposed to show. Well, I didn't save it. Varicella is 2. It didn't keep it.
I think you did it on MMR by accident.
Okay. But if I save this, when I come over to compliance, she's not going to be compliant in varicella. If I go up to the printer button and I print non-compliance and a separate report of why, the first report is going to give me what immunization she has, and I close it, and the second one is going to show me it's varicella, 1 dose minimum age 12 months. Dose 1 must be given when the student is greater than or equal to 361 days old, and she was not. That's the rule of why she is not compliant.
That was like my question about how can we put in an exemption for that, or do people say she needs to get another one?
The official rule would be she needs, because it was more than the 4-day grace, technically she needs to go get another shot.
Okay, so we can't put in, the nurse cannot write in an exemption that it was 6 days instead of 4 days or whatever.
They can. They can come in and say, oh, I want to say they figured that was close enough. Now, this was more than the 6 days, but I could come over to the exemption, go to medical, put in today's date however I want to put it in. And said, doctor said okay.
Tell our nurses with different things, I'm not giving this kid another whatever. They don't need it. There's no medical reason for them to have it. You know, that kind of thing. When it's like that, not necessarily varicella, but I know
right. Any of the ones that there is, right? And then it comes down to between you and the state when they audit you.
Okay.
Because the CDC and such it's a 4-day grace. It's not a 5-day grace.
Right.
The exception to that was MMR, where they said, well, if the first one was less than a year, then don't count it.
Right, but they need that many.
They still need
Right.
2, but I can discount the first one.
First one. Okay.
If
So
they happen to have more than one before that, then my rules aren't allowing for that.
So our recommendation should be to those parents, they will need to get another one. Your child was too young according to the requirements. And if the doctor, like this one did 2 years ago to us, says that,
Get it in writing.
You will tell them to put it in writing, keep it in the child's file, and document it like you just showed, right?
Yep, I would definitely have them put it in writing because that covers you.
Okay. And can I ask you one other question on the documentation? Since we don't have a nurse yet for next year, they're still working on it. Over the summer, when people have asked me for, a copy of their kids' immunizations, or when we get record requests, I've been printing out those lists that you just showed a minute ago for the ones that say non-compliant, and I've been saying to them, these are the details.
Right.
Because there's kids that I know are nurses. We've had a string of nurses the past couple of years, but the nurses have said they consider the kids in compliance, and I am not a nurse, and I'm not going to write down that I'm saying they're compliant. So
nope.
Is there anything else in the MMS system that I should print out, or does that make sense that that's what we're sending them for a kid? The kids that are compliant, it's no issue. I print out the screen that says they're compliant, and that's...
Right. If I print either of these, what it's going to show at the top is whether they are state requirement compliant or not.
Right.
And the list of dates should be enough to, they can look at the dates and know, nope.
Right, and I include that second page that says,
and the reason why.
I show them why, so that I just wanted to make sure that made sense to you. That's the kind of documentation at this point that I'm giving people.
Yep. Now
With that as well, I don't know if that woman can hear me. If the student is being transferred out, in all honesty, it's who's taking him in that has to worry about his compliance.
That's correct.
Right, and that's why I say, I don't want them to think oh my goodness, why did that school have that kid? They weren't in compliance. I want them to understand that according to our health person who was here, he or she considered the child compliant.
Correct.
Do you know what I mean? But I can't, I should have prefaced this, we just rolled over from our old system that we were using, the immunizations, just at the end of last school year. So there's still some things to be tweaked, like adding the religious exemptions and that kind of thing. So since we need to keep these records moving in the meantime, that's what I, did. But.
Yep. Now there's a couple of other things that I haven't shown you yet. One is under health operations. You can do a health mail merge, and there's a couple of them that are geared for immunizations. So I can do missing immunizations, incomplete, missing documentation, or medical request for a new student or a transfer or somebody who was home educated. So there's things like this that you can put out of, okay, I'm missing immunizations, and I can send that out and say, wait a minute, I don't have one of my shots. I can go ahead and tell it to build the table. It will allow me, basically it knows I'm looking for non-compliance. If I was looking for those that had, say, missing, incomplete, I'd be able, it would automatically select those for me. And I'm just not going to do the entire school. So I'm going to go ahead and let it print. And let me do the missing one instead of the, I want to do new students because they don't have any. Not just that I'm missing date, but I'm missing the whole thing. So if I go back here, it knows that they don't have any recorded. I'm going to let it print. I could have printed the report in addition to building the table, so I would see who those people were. And now when I go over to my master document, I'm going to go to the one that's a letter for, I'm not doing the visit to the nurse, I'm looking for a new student request for medical records. And I'm using the same file I created over here. This C month line is going to give today's date as August space, comma, August space 2, comma, 2013. This gives the parent name and address, you know, dear Mr. and Mrs. whoever state law requires, you know, what's going on. If you want, you could probably even give them the link to the state site, conditional and so on. And these can be set up that you can actually go to more than one page. And on the next page, you can, there's a page to come back with the new information. And you can also have a page that, this one was set up for New Hampshire, that gives the rules of what they're looking for. And this has not been updated recently. So you would have to come in and modify, because on something like the DPT, they're not worrying about 14 or older, because it's no longer 10 years, it's now 5 years and so on. But if I go ahead to the merge print letters, I can print this. Oh, that far back, huh? Excuse me a minute while I change my letter. I think that was the only one it needed. Old system was M initial, not M name. New system, it's M name. But there's they had added their own period, so I can go in and take it off. There, Mr. and Miss, you know, this is to the parent, shows you what's needed, because this was a new student, some information about exemptions, and so on. You would be able to go, here's the form to come back, and it shows the student's name, their ID, homeroom, grade level. So here's an area for the doctor to fill out of what's going on. And then the last page is going to show them what sort of immunizations, of sort of guidelines, so they know what they need to work with. This is where I was saying before we could test on their birthday, because the rules back then were, if they were on or after born in 1981, then they needed 3 doses. If it was before that, you know, except for those, they needed 4, because it was OPV instead of IPV. So it gives, you know, minimum and so on. But you can come in and do that sort of information. And then you get it for the next student. And a lot of the health reports, the mail mergers are set up so you have one page with the letter, one page for them to take to the doctor, and maybe another page to bring back. You know, one page to send back of, okay, here's when my, you know, my student failed the vision hearing, the vision screening. Here's a page for this parent to send back to the school saying, here's the date of when they're due to get their eyes examined, and then there's another page for the doctor to put in their results from that exam. So it does give you that capability to be able to work with that. But the wording is different if I'm doing the letter for transfer students. So it just, you know, some of the wording is a little different because it's a transfer student. Different ones, you know, home educated versus missing immunizations. If they're missing the immunization, then I'm going to give them the rule of what they're missing. So if Amy didn't have her varicella at all, it would come up and show that she was missing her varicella. And right now this is showing up to 6 different rules. I don't have the right table built up for that. I would have to come in and say, oh, I want to build the missing one. And that changes which letter it is that I'm building. So I can come in and work with that and be able to say, show me which ones are there. I can go ahead and build them all. So it built a file. I can now come in and say, here's my missing, and print. Okay. Excuse me while I make rude noises. But you can come in and set it up where, as I said, it'll give you the, if I go back here, it's going to give me this as to what they're missing. It won't give me the sub-rule, but it will give me, okay, they're missing a polio or they're missing a varicella. So it'll just give me that information. Some schools have modified the record listing for the immunization requirements for the why they're non-compliant. Say, don't give me the whole printout, just give me the line of what it is. Just give me the rule heading and don't give me the rest of it. And that can be done also. Thank you very much then. In all of these, remember, you can go to the question mark for help. It's going to know where you are and bring up help on what you're working with. So it'll know what you're working with here. You can go to more things, go into your operations. If I wanted to work with the mail merge, I could come into the master documents, and as I scroll down, it will give me the different table names that it's going to create, and it's also going to let me see what the fields are in my different tables. And then depending on the letter, it will let me see what are my variables, what are the fields that I'm going to bring in. So if I was doing this for the immunizations, I would be able to see, here's my immunization type, which is, Hep B, polio, whatever, the date, the age they were, the flag, the dose. It brings in all that information that I can include in the letter if I choose. I don't have to, but I could if I wanted to. So it does give me extra information that I can put in if I need to. So remember, the help is there. There's also, of course, you can go under Help About MMS and see the version that you have of the software. This gives our hours and our phone number. It also gives the email for support and our website where you can go and log in to the client area, log into the forum. Look, if you have a webinar subscription, you can sign up for the live webinars or view the recorded webinars in the video learning library. So you have all of those options to also get help for what you're putting in there. So if there's no more questions, I thank you for participating and hope to have you at another webinar.